Hi, I'm Maria Exner. I'm the editor of ZEIT-Magazin here in Germany, in Berlin. I'm a journalist and I'm an incoming Thomas Mann Fellow in the next year, in 2021. And I'm really happy to participate in this edition of MutuallyMann and the exchange of thoughts about the text, Thomas Mann's essay, Germany and the Germans, that he delivered as a speech in May 1945. Now, reading and listening to the other contributions during this MutuallyMann experience, I found three things particularly interesting, three thoughts that other people had on this essay. The first thing that really struck me was, and other commentators were as well struck by the fact that Mann's diagnosis, his analysis of the concept of liberty of the Germans in the years before 1945 and even longer ago in the history is a really kind of twisted and, in his mind, kind of broken idea of liberty. Why? Because it's a concept of liberty that relates to a people, a collective idea of liberty, not an idea of liberty on the individual level, on the level of the individual citizen. The writer Olga Grjasnowa, for example, she commented on the fact that she has the feeling that this kind of identity-based and very nationalistic concept of liberty is still well and alive today, and that Mann's way to describe it is still very relevant to understand our present times. Now, the literary scholar Kai Sina also underlined the fact that here Mann was speaking about the Volk, which we say in German for the people, as the entity that strives for liberty, and that this collectivistic idea is a really dangerous concept. And I think we see these nationalistic tendencies that were driving the Second World War. We see these nationalistic tendencies today in many countries around the world, and so to reread Mann's definition of this kind of nationalistic concept of liberty is still really interesting. The second aspect that struck me was how many of the commentators found it really interesting and also worth their critique how Mann was speaking about the Germans himself as a really kind of closed and very homogeneous group. The essay is called Germany and the Germans, and he speaks about a German or the Germans as a group of people who share a common idea of art, a common characteristics of thought. And the writer Max Czollek said that in his words, in his essay, Mann himself is kind of perpetuating a hegemonic history, and that Mann's view is narrow. While we are reading this text, we can see how narrow Mann's view on his contemporaries is, that he doesn't see how heterogeneous the German society was even during his times, that there were many different groups of people, obviously the victims of the Nazi regime, also the people in the opposition, but also many other groups, writers and artists and people with kind of diverse identities. And I think it's a really relevant point to kind of underline how interesting it is that Mann, in his own words, didn't acknowledge at all in this essay how heterogeneous the German society was back then. And Max Czollek is saying this is still a problem, in his words, I think. for the German society today. And now the third point that I think was interesting about, the comments on this text was how powerful the whole essay is as an act of self-critique and self-questioning. Mann is delivering this essay at a time when he himself as a German was, and as a German writer who had a way to go towards really embracing democracy and individual liberty. He was a really reactionary, almost a conservative character in his younger years. And he's delivering a speech where he's really questioning his own characteristics and his own train of thoughts with regard to the support of democracy. And I think it was, among others, the journalist and music critic Alex Rosk who acknowledged how powerful Mann's quote is, that he's saying, I'm not speaking to you about the other Germans, the bad Germans, and I'm the good German. Everything that I think is critical about the Germans is also within me, and I've been through it all. And Alex Ross, I think, rightly is saying that the Mann essay is also, is calling the Americans to ask themselves similarly critical questions, to ask the Americans today in this year 2020, to ask themselves as Americans, what is within us? What are our characteristics that make it difficult for us to embrace diversity? What is our concept of liberty that we are striving for? And I think Alex Ross is really, making a strong point about the essay being almost a call to action for everybody who reads it to make this self-assessment.